So back to the United States, where Joe Biden has confirmed he's considering whether or not to run for president. In a conference call with the Democratic National Committee members, the current US Vice President said he was trying to decide whether he could give his whole heart and whole soul to a run for the White House. If Biden enters, he'll be taking on Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, who is currently the front runner of the race, and another close contender, Bernie Sanders, who's the independent senator from Vermont. Clinton is struggling to overcome the fallout from her use of a private email server while working as the nation's top diplomat. Now, earlier, our reporter, Nathaneal Amos-sansam, spoke to David Pakman, who's the host of the internationally syndicated political television and talk radio program, The David Pakman Show in the United States. He started by asking him what we know about the American vice president's intentions.
Well, we know that given the position he's in, he's only going to run if he ascertains that he has at least a reasonable shot of securing the Democratic nomination. There's this sort of idea that Vice President Biden could maybe be a slightly more progressive alternative to Hillary Clinton, but a more pragmatic and likely choice than Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from the state of Vermont, who's running as a Democrat in the primary. An analysis of the policy positions of Vice President Biden compared to Hillary Clinton reveal pretty clearly that he's only slightly more to the left of Hillary Clinton, particularly on some foreign policy and trade issues. But there is this sort of idea that in the midst of a number of so-called scandals that the American right has placed blame for on Hillary Clinton, that maybe Joe Biden would be a more electable alternative to Hillary Clinton.
Okay, and what do you think the impact of a Biden candidacy would be on the Democratic presidential race?
It's always hard to really pinpoint specifically what the impact of a new entrant into a primary race would be, because any polling done now about Joe Biden is polling done under the current status where he is not a candidate. That being said, it does seem like Joe Biden would, at least in the early primary states, New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, and some others, be able to pick up a considerable amount of support. One recent poll I saw, and the pollster escapes me off the top of my head, showed that actually Joe Biden's favorability and chances in some of these early primaries would be pretty good, immediately putting him ahead of Bernie Sanders, even conceivably. So I think that at the state-by-state level, there's definitely a number of states where Vice President Biden could do quite well. The broader strategy and the broader impact that he would have remains to be seen. And remember, we have had no Democratic debates yet. The first one will be in October, and it's still a real question as to how much of an impact those would have, but certainly they would present a good opportunity for all of these candidates to make themselves known.
Just a few months ago, Hillary Clinton was talked of as being the inevitable candidate and that her nomination would be almost like a coronation. What's gone wrong for her campaign?
Well, there's sort of two ways to look at it. There's the question of what's gone wrong for her campaign, but there's also just an analysis of the reality that other ideas, including those presented by Bernie Sanders, are getting pretty popular. So Hillary Clinton in the U.S. has been sort of dogged a bit by the recalcitrant nature of the so-called email scandal, and the American right has done a very good job of keeping that story going. That being said, the change to the dynamic of the Democratic primary has been more a result of the proactive nature of candidates like Bernie Sanders, who has been out there touting what are often maligned, but in reality quite popular populist ideas, those of discussing income and wealth inequality, discussing health care for all, and reducing the cost of public and higher education in the United States. These are all really popular ideas. So a lot of Hillary Clinton's recent sort of trailing off in some of the early polls has been more a result of the fact that Bernie Sanders has been very proactively out there talking about popular ideas, whereas Hillary Clinton has had a more limited and a sort of restricted public presence so far, and we'll see if that changes with the start of the Democratic debates in about 6 weeks.
Okay. In terms of Bernie Sanders himself, at the beginning of the year, he had a very low profile and is now seen in many polls, as you already mentioned, doing very well against Hillary Clinton. Why is that, do you feel?
Bernie Sanders from the beginning had a name recognition issue. So at the very beginning, when Bernie Sanders was polling quite low, even in early primary states like New Hampshire and Iowa, where that has since turned around, his support seemed to correlate with his name recognition. And as Bernie Sanders has achieved higher name recognition, his support in the polls has increased. So that's a good sign for Senator Sanders. The sort of caveat to this is that we don't know how far this will go. In other words, how much more name recognition can he get through the upcoming Democratic debates and coverage from sort of establishment corporate media? And will his support continue to track name recognition to the same degree? It's not clear that that will happen. It remains to be seen.
How would you rate the level of debate on the Democratic side as opposed to the Republican side?
There's absolutely no comparison as to the level of debate happening on the Democratic side when compared to the Republican side. The first major Republican debate, which was a Fox News Facebook partner debate, saw almost no substantive policy discussion. If I recall correctly, it was about 55 minutes into the debate before we even saw what could be loosely described as substantive policy debate. It was more set up questions for ad hominem attacks and sort of discussing personality differences between the candidates. On the Democratic side, the reality could not be more different, in spite of the fact that Hillary Clinton has not been publicly present to the same degree that some of the other candidates have. Bernie Sanders regularly discussing the realities of our sort of status quo capitalistic system in the United States, failings of that system to the extent that they can be discussed in a serious manner, explorations of how we might reduce the wealth and inequality gap that has been created here, serious discussions about providing health care to everybody in the country, regardless of ability to pay, and how such a plan might be paid for. Very substantive discussions that are just not happening among the Republican candidates right now.
Finally, what do you think is the most likely outcome if Joe Biden enters the race and if he doesn't enter? Obviously, given the relative caveats that you've just mentioned.
Historically speaking, any guesses made in late August or early September of the year before the election year with regard to primaries those guesses have rarely been accurate. So I think it's very difficult to say what the dynamic of the race will be once we know whether Vice President Biden is going to enter or not, and once we start seeing maybe one, maybe a couple of the Democratic debates. The sort of, statistically speaking, the most likely scenario is a Hillary Clinton Democratic primary victory. That being said, there are numerous other scenarios that, while not sort of over 50% likelihood, still have a not insignificant probability of happening. This includes someone other than Hillary Clinton taking a lead. This includes the possibility of some early Bernie Sanders primary wins, for example, in New Hampshire, that could sort of change the momentum or the dynamic around this presumed nominee status. So I think, historically speaking, it's too early to really guess. Looking only at polling, it does appear that Hillary Clinton is still absolutely the favorite, but a lot can change. It's only the end of August in 2015, and we have about 14, 15 months until we actually have this election.
Well, now we go to our feature story of the night, in which we